Night Shift Horror Stories, Part 1. The Last Customer. Fiction inspired by common night shift experiences. If you've ever worked the night shift, you know there are hours when the world feels completely abandoned. The roads empty out. The phones stop ringing. Even the air seems different after 2 in the morning. I learned that the hard way during my first month, working alone at a small gas station, just outside a rural highway. I won't mention the town's name because some people who still work there know exactly what happened. Whether they believe me or not doesn't really matter. I know what I saw. I was 23 years old and desperately needed money. The overnight shift paid $2 more per hour than the day shift, so I volunteered without thinking twice. My schedule was simple: 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The station sat by itself about 5 miles outside town. Behind it was a thick stretch of woods, and across the road was nothing but an abandoned repair shop that had been closed for years. Most nights were boring. Truck drivers came in for coffee. Travelers stopped for gas. Around 3 in the morning, everything usually went silent. The manager always joked, "If you can survive between 3 and 4, you've survived the night." I thought he meant because it was boring. I eventually realized he meant something else. It was a Thursday in late October. Rain had been falling since sunset. The parking lot reflected the glow of the gas pumps like black glass. At exactly 2:47 a.m., the automatic doors slid open. A man walked inside. He looked normal enough, late 50s, gray jacket, black baseball cap. His clothes were soaking wet, yet somehow there were no footprints behind him. I noticed that immediately. He slowly walked through every aisle without picking anything up. I smiled politely. "Need help finding something?" He didn't answer. He just kept walking. Eventually, he stopped in front of the refrigerated drinks. He stared through the glass without opening the door. 5 minutes passed. 10 minutes. He never moved. It started making me uncomfortable. I asked again, "Sir?" Nothing. Then, without turning round, he quietly asked, "What time do you lock the doors?" I replied, "We don't. We're open all night." He nodded once. "That's unfortunate." Then he walked toward the coffee station. Still no footprints. Still dripping wet. Still silent. He poured himself a large coffee, added nothing to it, walked to the counter. I rang it up. He reached into his pocket. Instead of money, he placed an old motel room key on the counter. Not a key, a real brass key with a faded plastic tag. Room 6. I laughed awkwardly. "I can't take this." He looked directly into my eyes for the first time. His eyes seemed strangely pale, almost gray. He whispered, "I know." Then he turned around and walked out. I watched him disappear into the rain. No car, no headlights, nothing. He simply vanished into the darkness. The next morning, I told my manager. He became unusually quiet. Instead of laughing, he asked, "Did he leave anything?" I showed him the motel key. His face turned white. He grabbed it immediately. "Where did you get this?" "The customer paid with it." He stared at it for several seconds, then walked into the office without another word. When he came back, he handed me $50. "Forget about this." I asked why. He simply repeated himself. "Forget about it." Of course I didn't. That afternoon, I searched online for old motels near the highway. I found one. It had been demolished nearly 30 years earlier after a fire killed several guests. Among the victims, a man from room 6. I stared at the newspaper scan for nearly 5 minutes. The black and white photograph looked exactly like the customer. Same jacket, same cap, same face. I convinced myself it was just a coincidence. It had to be. A week later, he came back. Exactly. The doors opened. The bell chimed. There he was. Dry this time. He slowly walked the aisles again, stopped at the cooler, stared through the glass, then approached the counter. I forgot something. I swallowed hard. What? He leaned closer. My wife. My stomach tightened. What do you mean? He looked toward the dark highway outside. She never made it out. Before I could respond, every light inside the store flickered. The security monitors went completely black. For maybe 5 seconds, the station was silent. When the lights returned, he was gone. The front doors had never opened. The bell never rang. It was as if he'd disappeared inside the building. I checked every aisle, the bathrooms, the storage room. Nothing. Then I heard it. 3 knocks, coming from the employee-only freezer. Nobody should have been inside. I slowly unlocked the heavy metal door. The freezing air rolled over me. The room was empty, except, written across the frosted back wall, were 4 words. She's still out there. The letters looked as though someone had traced them into the frost with a finger. I slammed the freezer shut. By the time I opened it again, the writing was gone. At sunrise, I quit. I didn't even finish my shift. A week later, I learned another overnight employee had been hired. He lasted exactly 2 nights. He refused to explain why he quit. Part 2, Floor 13. Fiction inspired by common night shift experiences. Hospitals never really sleep, even at 3 in the morning. There are nurses walking the halls, doctors answering emergency pages, and machines quietly keeping people alive. After working hospital security for almost 4 years, I thought I'd seen everything. I was wrong. The hospital where I worked had 12 floors. Every employee knew that. Patients knew it too. The elevators displayed floors 1 through 12, plus the basement. There was number 13th floor. At least, that's what everyone believed. My overnight shift started at 11 p.m. Most nights were routine. I checked entrances, responded to alarms, escorted nurses to their cars, and made sure unauthorized visitors weren't wandering the building. One rainy Tuesday, just after 2:30 a.m., my radio crackled. Security, respond to floor 13. Patient disturbance. I frowned. Repeat that. The dispatcher sounded confused. Before I could ask another question, the transmission cut off with loud static. I assumed someone had misspoken. Maybe they meant floor 3. I took the elevator anyway. When the doors closed, I noticed something strange. There was a button I had never seen before. It wasn't lit. It wasn't labeled differently. It looked like it had always been there. Curious, I pressed it. For a second, nothing happened. Then the elevator began moving upward, past floor 12. The display changed. The doors slid open. The hallway beyond looked older than the rest of the hospital. The lights were dim. The wallpaper was faded. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant mixed with dust. No nurses. No patients. No sounds. Every room door stood slightly open. I stepped into the hallway. My name is Daniel. Hospital security. No answer. Only silence. Then, a nurse appeared at the far end of the corridor. She wore an old-fashioned white uniform with a nurse's cap, the kind I'd only seen in history books. She smiled. "You shouldn't be here." I asked, "Where is everyone?" Instead of answering, she pointed toward room 1317. Then she disappeared behind a corner. I hurried after her. The hallway was empty. There was nowhere she could have gone. Room 1317's door was wide open. Inside sat a single hospital bed, an old heart monitor, a chair, nothing else. The room looked abandoned decades ago. Then I noticed someone lying in the bed. covered completely by a white sheet. I slowly approached. "Sir." No response. My radio hissed. "Do not uncover the patient." The voice wasn't dispatch. It sounded distorted, almost mechanical. I backed away. As I reached the doorway, the sheet slowly rose. Not because someone sat up, because something underneath was breathing. Very slowly, very deeply. Then one pale hand slipped out from beneath the sheet. It pointed directly at me. The radio screamed with static. Every light went out. I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe 5 seconds. Maybe 30. When the emergency lights switched on, the bed was empty. The sheet lay perfectly folded. I ran back toward the elevator. The hallway suddenly seemed much longer. Door after door slowly creaked open by themselves. Inside every room, someone stood watching. Patients, doctors, children, all perfectly still. None of them blinked. None of them spoke. They simply watched as I hurried toward the elevator. When I reached it, the doors were already open. I stepped inside and repeatedly pressed the button for the lobby. The doors closed. The elevator descended. When it reached the lobby, I practically stumbled out. Everything looked normal. Bright lights, busy nurses, phones ringing, as if nothing had happened. I went straight to the security office. The dispatcher looked confused. "Where were you?" "Responding to your call." "What call?" "The disturbance on floor 13. She stared at me. "I never called you." I checked my radio log. There was no record of the transmission. None. The next evening, I asked one of the oldest maintenance workers if he ever heard of a 13th floor. His expression changed immediately. He lowered his voice. "You're not supposed to ask about that." After a long pause, he finally spoke. "When this hospital opened nearly 60 years ago, the top floor housed patients with contagious illnesses. A fire broke out one winter night. The smoke spread too quickly. Dozens of people died before firefighters reached them." I asked, "Was that floor 13? He slowly nodded. "They removed it during renovations. New elevator system. New records. Officially." He looked toward the elevators. "It never existed. For months, nothing happened." I almost convinced myself I had imagined everything. Then one night, around 2:30 a.m., I was escorting a new nurse to her car. She stopped walking. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" "A hospital announcement." I hadn't heard anything. She looked back toward the building. "They're calling for security." I felt every hair on my arm stand up. Before I could answer, every elevator in the hospital opened at the same time. One by one. Empty. Waiting. Neither of us moved. Then, from somewhere above us, a faint voice echoed through the night. "You forgot someone." The elevators closed together with a heavy metallic slam. The nurse quit the next morning. I stayed another week before handing in my resignation. Some nights, I still dream about that hallway. And every time the elevator doors open, someone is already waiting inside. End of part 2.